They told her to be a lady. She became a killer. They taught her to pray to gods. She became one. In a world that played by blood and crowns, Arya Stark rewrote the rules. Not with strength, not with beauty, but with defiance sharpened into destiny. Every time the world tried to tame her, she learned a new way to win. The wolf who wouldn't wear silk. Arya Stark was born into a story that didn't want her. In Winterfell's halls of lineage and manners, she was a storm disguised as a daughter, a girl who ran from sewing lessons to swing wooden swords, who chased shadows instead of courtly smiles. Where her sister fit the mold, Arya shattered it. The realm called her wild, untamable, unfeminine. But that disobedience was her first act of survival. Arya understood, even as a child, that the world's rules were built to contain girls like her, to shape their courage into courtesy and their hunger into silence. So she ran, she bruised, she bled, and in those small rebellions she built the muscles of resistance that would one day carve her name into legend. Her father saw it too. "You have your mother's temper," he once told her. But what he really meant was that she had her mother's truth, the northern blood that refused to kneel, the iron in her spirit that would outlast empires. When the world fell into chaos, Arya's refusal to fit the mold became her greatest weapon, because while others clung to the illusion of order, Arya had already learned how to live without it. The girl who became nobody. When Arya fled King's Landing, she was no longer a Stark, not in name, not in safety. She was prey, disguised as predator, a child hiding among corpses and chaos. Yet even then, she refused to be powerless. Every disguise she wore, every lie she told, was not just survival, it was evolution. She was teaching herself how to disappear in a world obsessed with bloodlines. Her journey to Braavos transformed that survival into art. The House of Black and White taught her to kill, but what Arya learned was far greater: how to unlearn herself. She stripped away her name, her face, her ego, until all that was left was instinct and focus. But even as the faceless men tried to erase her, Arya never truly let go of her identity. When she said, "A girl is Arya Stark of Winterfell, and I'm going home," she committed the most powerful act of rebellion imaginable. She reclaimed her name after learning how to live without it. The world told her that power comes from anonymity, from belonging to something greater. Arya proved that real power comes from remembering who you are and choosing it every time they try to take it from you. The apprentice who outgrew her masters. The faceless men were assassins bound by rule and ritual, their order built on balance and indifference. But Arya's heart burned too fiercely for neutrality. She couldn't kill without conscience. She couldn't worship gods who demanded blindness. Her defiance was not ignorance, it was evolution. She took everything they taught her, the silence, the patience, the craft, and gave it soul. When she turned against the waif, it wasn't just vengeance, it was metamorphosis. Arya took the art of the faceless men and made it personal. She mastered death, but refused to belong to it. Her victory was not just survival, it was authorship. She became the writer of her own fate, wielding the same skills meant to erase her, to instead reclaim her place in the story. And when she walked away from Braavos, she didn't look back, because true mastery isn't submission, it's transcendence. The list that kept her human. While others in Westeros fought for crowns, Arya fought for names: Cersei, Ilan Payne, the Hound, Melisandre. Her list was not madness, it was memory. Each name was a scar, a reminder of who she was fighting for, of what had been stolen. In a world where girls were told to forget, Arya turned remembrance into resistance. The list kept her human. It anchored her in rage, yes, but also in love. Love for her father's justice, for her family's honor, for the innocence she lost and refused to let die quietly. Each night, she whispered the names like a prayer, not for vengeance alone, but to remind herself that she still felt, that she was still alive. Her list wasn't a descent into darkness, it was a map out of it, because the truth about vengeance is that it's not always corruption. Sometimes it's therapy, sometimes it's survival, sometimes it's the only way to remember you're still capable of caring. When fear became her faith. Arya's courage was never the absence of fear. It was the decision to walk with it. From the moment she held Needle for the first time, she understood that bravery was not about being unafraid. It was about moving anyway. When she faced death, she didn't pray to be saved. She whispered, "Not today." That mantra became her religion, a creed born not of gods, but of defiance. Fear didn't paralyze her, it purified her. Every confrontation, with the hound, with the waif, with death itself, stripped her closer to something elemental, the raw survival instinct that becomes divinity when shaped by purpose. Arya didn't conquer fear, she befriended it. She learned its rhythm, its hunger, its use. And in doing so, she mastered the most sacred truth of all. The only way to survive the game is to stop playing it by their rules.
The child who killed the myth. The world of Game of Thrones is built on prophecy and pride, men chasing legends, gods playing dice, and yet, when the Night King fell, it wasn't by the hand of prophecy or royal lineage. It was Arya, a girl without title, a girl no one saw coming. That moment, her leap through the shadows, her dagger finding the space between centuries of fear, was the narrative breaking itself open. Every system that worshipped destiny collapsed in that instant. Arya didn't fulfill a prophecy, she rewrote it, because that's who she had always been. The disruption, the answer to every "you can't." The living proof that survival is not about strength or blood, but about adaptability. She didn't kill a monster to prove she was brave. She killed it because she had already lived through worse. Arya Stark ended the apocalypse the same way she began her story: unseen, underestimated, unstoppable.
The return to the North. Arya's homecoming was not written for song or celebration. It was the quiet kind of return that only the broken understand. The walk back through familiar gates that no longer feel like home. The slow realization that the place you dreamed of returning to has moved on without you. When Arya Stark rode through the gates of Winterfell, she carried no banners, no army, no prophecy fulfilled. She brought only her silence, the kind forged by years of killing, wandering, surviving. She had been 1,000 faces and no one at all, and now she was expected to wear one she had long outgrown. The air was thick with nostalgia and unease. Winterfell's stones still stood where she had left them, but they felt smaller now, shrunken by the size of her experience. The courtyard that once echoed with her childish laughter now rang with absence. She could almost see the ghosts, her father's quiet strength, her mother's fierce gaze, Rob's laughter carried on the wind like an echo from another life. The North greeted her not with warmth, but with the cold of remembrance, and Arya met it with the calm of someone who had learned long ago that warmth can be dangerous. Her family looked at her as if she were both found and lost all over again. Sansa, regal and steady, studied her like a question she couldn't yet answer. They were no longer rivals in the way they once were, but reflections. Two survivors of the same cruelty, each sculpted differently by its hand. Sansa had learned to rule the world that had nearly devoured her. Arya had learned to exist outside of it entirely. When their eyes met across the hall, it was not recognition they shared, but understanding. the kind that passes only between those who have seen death and refuse to let it keep them. With Jon, the reunion was softer, but no less haunting. Their embrace was fierce, wordless, full of everything they could not say. For a brief heartbeat, Arya allowed herself to feel like that little girl again, the one who chased him through the courtyard with the wooden sword. But even as they held each other, she knew that innocence could not be reclaimed. He had his ghosts, she had hers, and both had learned the same truth, that peace is not something people like them are built to keep. Winterfell was still her home, but home is not always a place. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's the ache you carry when you realize you can never truly return. The walls that once sheltered her now felt like a cage. The snow that once felt pure now whispered of blood. The halls were too narrow, the air too still. The girl who had once hidden behind these stones had become a creature of movement, a wolf made of wind and scars. So Arya did not come back to belong. She came to bear witness, to see if the world she had bled for still existed, to make sure her family's ghosts rested in something more than ashes. Her footsteps through Winterfell's corridors were not those of a daughter returning home, but of a wanderer visiting the ruins of her childhood. She touched the walls not out of affection, but out of farewell. When she looked upon the godswood, she remembered every prayer she had whispered there. Childish, futile wishes for bravery, for vengeance, for safety. The tree stood unchanged, its face carved in bleeding red sap, ancient and unflinching. It had seen her before she became the shadow she is now, and for a moment she thought it pitied her. But Arya did not believe in pity anymore. She believed in endurance. She bowed her head not in worship, but in acknowledgement, two old survivors recognizing each other. The North, in all its unforgiving beauty, had made her, but it could no longer contain her. There are some spirits too vast for walls, too restless for peace. Arya Stark was no longer the child of Winterfell. She was its echo, its vengeance, its freedom personified. She would always carry it within her, in the steel of her voice, in the frost of her eyes, but she would never again belong to it. And so when she looked out from the battlements toward the horizon, she didn't see home. She saw possibility. The wind that rushed through her hair wasn't cold anymore. It was calling. The wolf in her stirred, restless, remembering the feel of wild paths and open roads. She realized, with something like peace, that she hadn't come back to stay. She had come back to say goodbye. Because the North would always be her blood, her name, her beginning. But Arya Stark was no longer just of Winterfell. She was of the world beyond it. The forests, the faces, the seas. The girl who had left to become no one had finally become everyone. A creature made of stories, names, and choices. And as the snow fell around her, soft as ash, Arya smiled. Not because she had found peace, but because she had made her own. The price of becoming no one. The magic of Arya's power is also its curse. In learning to be no one, she lost the comfort of being someone. She could wear 1,000 faces, but none of them ever felt like home. The discipline that saved her, the detachment, the control, also distanced her from the world she once wanted to protect. Every time she smiled, there was calculation beneath it. Every embrace came with hesitation, as if touch itself had become foreign. The girl who once built snowmen with her siblings had learned to kill without trembling. There's tragedy in that transformation, not because it was wrong, but because it was irreversible. You can't spend years in the company of death and come back speaking the language of the living. Yet, Arya never despised what she had become. She carried her darkness like a tool, not a curse. She knew that every monster she faced, every man she killed, every mask she wore had been necessary. Because the truth is, Innocence is a luxury of safety, and safety was something the world never gave her. When she looks in the mirror now, she sees fragments of every face she's ever worn: child, soldier, ghost, survivor. The old Arya is still there, but quieter, hidden beneath layers of memory. She didn't kill her past, she buried it, deep enough to grow something new. The girl who chose the sea. At the end of her story, when the dust of wars has settled and the thrones have turned to ash, Arya stands on the deck of a ship staring into the horizon. It's a moment so gentle, so deceptively simple, that people almost miss its magnitude. For the first time in her life, Arya is not running from something. She's running toward. The girl who once whispered names into the dark now whispers the name of the world she hasn't seen yet. "What's west of Westeros?" she asks. Not because she needs an answer, but because she has finally learned to love the question. She's no longer the girl obsessed with vengeance or identity. She's the woman who has mastered the art of becoming. The sea is her new teacher. It doesn't care about titles or revenge or lineage. It rewards only those who adapt. Arya sails into the unknown not to escape her past, but to honor it. To carry every lesson, every scar, every ghost with her into a place where she can finally write a story that belongs to no one else. She is not running away from the game. She has simply stopped playing. The wolf who left the story. Arya Stark's ending is not about victory, it's about freedom. The Seven Kingdoms rebuild their walls, their councils, their wars, but Arya chooses the open sky. She refuses the rule book that has governed every hero before her. She doesn't take a throne. She doesn't settle. She doesn't die for someone else's glory. She just leaves. That departure is her final rebellion, the last broken rule. Because in Westeros, power always demanded permanence. Kings stayed, queens ruled, heroes sacrificed. Arya does none of it. She walks away from the myth that made her, claiming the most radical prize of all, a future unpromised, unshaped, unchained. As the ship fades into the horizon, we realize that her greatest kill was never the Night King. It was destiny itself. She slayed the expectation that every warrior must end in fire or blood. She lived. She endured. She kept moving. And in a universe addicted to tragedy, that is the most revolutionary ending of all.